There is magic in Ooo, that much you know. You have watched it glow in 1,000 different colors, blue-white crackling from the tips of an old man's fingers, green and rotting from the hands of something ancient and hollow, soft pink blooming like warm light through bubblegum skin. Magic is everywhere in the Land of Ooo. It hangs in the air like humidity. It seeps up from the soil. It writes itself across the sky in the patterns of comets and the slow migrations of impossible creatures. But here's the thing nobody tells you at the start. The magic in Ooo is not just decoration. It is not set dressing or fantasy shorthand or a convenient excuse for why princesses can throw fireballs and dogs can stretch into the shape of a bicycle. The magic in Ooo has a history. It has rules. It has a price. And most of the characters who wield it have already paid that price in ways so quiet and so devastating that you might not notice until a scene ends and something settles into your chest that you cannot quite name. Tonight, we are going to peel back every layer. We are going to trace magic in Ooo all the way back to its deepest root, to the moment before the world was called Ooo at all, when it was still just a broken version of Earth, radioactive and quiet and very slowly becoming something else. We are going to follow it through 4 elemental forces older than civilization, through a crown built by a dinosaur in a world of prehistoric magic, through the inheritance of a demon's daughter, through the terrifying question of whether creating candy people from scratch is science or something much more unsettling. We are going to sit with a cosmic entity that is literally made of chaos, and we are going to try to understand what it means that the most powerful force in the universe was defeated not with a weapon, but with a song. Get comfortable. Let the sound of this wash over you. There is a lot of ground to cover, and all of it is extraordinary. Part 1. The World Before Magic. Earth, the Mushroom War, and the return of something ancient. Before there was Ooo, there was Earth. Not the clean, green, nature documentary Earth you might picture. This was a specific Earth, somewhere between the late 20th and early 21st century, full of highways and apartment buildings and chain restaurants, and people who had managed, mostly, to sort out the business of keeping each other alive. A world with hospitals and music and physics textbooks and archaeologists who chased old things across Scandinavia and fell in love with women who wanted to see the Australian outback. It was, as far as these things go, a fairly ordinary world. And then it ended. The exact cause of the Mushroom War is never spelled out in full, and this is deliberate. Pendleton Ward, the creator of Adventure Time, has spoken in interviews about wanting the apocalypse to feel real in the way that real disasters feel. Present in the background, visible in the debris, but not turned into a clean narrative. There were nuclear weapons. There was something mutagenic. There were bombs so catastrophically strange that the craters they left were still visible thousands of years later, visible from space, in fact, sitting in the rough geography of what used to be Europe. The world did not just break. It was changed on a fundamental level, altered in its chemical and possibly spiritual composition, in ways that would take centuries to fully express themselves. And here is where the magic comes in its very first and most foundational form. Adventure Time's world, the world of Ooo, is explicitly described by Pendleton Ward as a place where the bombs fell, and then magic came back into the world. That phrase, came back, is doing an enormous amount of work. Not arrived, not appeared, not was created, came back. As though magic had always been there, underneath everything, waiting with the patience of deep geological time for the right conditions to resurface. As though the age of technology and rationalism had been a temporary suppression of something much older, and the Mushroom War had, in the most catastrophic way imaginable, reset the conditions to something more permissive. This is one of the most quietly profound things Adventure Time ever establishes, and it does so in a single phrase. Think about what that implies. Every wizard, every enchanted artifact, every elemental force you see in the show is not a new development. It is a re-emergence. The magic that Princess Bubblegum channels, the ice that spills from the crown, the fire that runs in Flame Princess's veins, all of it is something that existed before, something the world remembers. The apocalypse did not introduce magic to Earth. It removed the civilizational noise that had been drowning magic out, and in the silence that followed, magic remembered how to breathe. You can see this history written into the landscape if you know where to look. The ruins that poke up through the soil of Ooo are the ruins of human civilization. Car frames, crumbling highway infrastructure, the occasional half-buried skyscraper repurposed as a tower or a kabia. The world has grown over and around these remnants the way a forest grows over a parking lot. Slowly, completely, until the original surface is almost invisible beneath the new life. Almost. Not entirely. Finn falls into holes and finds shopping carts. Jake stretches his arm through the earth and comes up holding artifacts from a world 1,000 years gone. The old things are still there, they have just become the foundation for something entirely different. What the Mushroom War produced, in that long radioactive aftermath, was not simply destruction. It was a kind of radical mixing of human genetic material, of animal life, of whatever mutagenic substances the weapons dispersed, of the ambient magical energy that was seeping back up from wherever it had been sleeping. The creatures of Ooo are not accidents. They are experiments that succeeded, in the broadest possible sense. Candy people condensed out of a pink biological mass that would eventually become Princess Bubblegum's ancestral material. Rainicorns evolved from, or were simply always present, as the mystical flying horse creatures they are, speaking Korean and drifting through phases of light. The goblin populations, the various monster species, the humans on the islands. All of them are the products of a world that broke open and then healed into something it had never been before. Magic is the medium of all of this. Magic is what the world became when the old rules stopped applying. But here is the crucial caveat that Adventure Time eventually, quietly reveals. This was not the first time. The world had gone through cycles before. The magic that returned after the Mushroom War was not even especially new magic. It was just the latest iteration of something that had been cycling through the earth for millions, possibly billions, of years. The evidence for this is hiding in the distant past of the show's mythology, in the era of the dinosaurs, in the time when magic was not a returning force but an established one, when the elemental beings were powerful enough to build castles out of ice and heat individual cups of coffee with living fire, when a comet shaped like the green face of death fell from the sky every 1,000 years and changed the direction of history. We will get to that comet. We will get to all of it. For now, hold on to this foundation. Oo's magic is old. It is older than the show, older than the Mushroom War, older than the most ancient characters who populate the story. It is cyclical and patient and deeply, fundamentally woven into what the planet is. Everything that comes after, every character, every artifact, every magical catastrophe, is downstream of this basic fact. The world is magical because magic is what the world is made of, when you remove everything else. The Mushroom War did not create this, and it just removed the dam. And in the 1,000 years that followed, in the relative quiet of a world that was learning to be Ooo instead of Earth, the magic returned with all the energy of water that had been held back too long. It flooded back into every crack. It filled every available space. It grew creatures and kingdoms and entire dimensions that had no equivalent in the world before. It wrote new rules over the old ones and left just enough of the old world visible. In the ruins, in the technology the characters sometimes use, in the shape of a human boy who somehow survived in a world that should have left no room for ordinary people, to remind you of what was there before. This is the foundation. Remember it, because everything else is built on top of it. And everything else will make more sense when you know where the ground beneath it came from. Consider for a moment what the post-Mushroom War period actually looked like. Not the bright candy-colored version of Ooo that we see through most of the show, but the raw, smoking aftermath, the 1,000 years between the bombs and the world we actually visit. The show gives us glimpses. Marceline walking through the ruins as a child, a small, dark-haired girl in a devastated city, carrying a stuffed animal and looking for anything that resembled safety. Simon Petrikov recording increasingly fragmented videos in the wreckage, his skin turning blue, his speech beginning to slip sideways from its normal grooves. Fires burning on the horizon of a landscape that no longer had anyone to tend them or fight them. Magic was re-emerging during this period, but not all at once. It was not a switch that flipped, it was more like the return of a tide, gradual, then suddenly rushing, filling every available space with a kind of life and strangeness that the old pre-war world had been too rigid to accommodate. The first magical creatures of the new era were probably small, strange, unclear in their purposes. Over decades and then centuries, they grew more numerous, more elaborate, more confident in their own existence. The pink biological mass that would become Princess Bubblegum and the Mother Gum spread slowly through the ruins of a city, learning what it was. The first candy-like organisms differentiated. The first fire beings found their way to the volcanic regions of the altered landscape and built their proto-civilization in the heat. The world of Ooo that we see in Adventure Time is approximately 1,000 years past this rebuilding. That is long enough for civilizations to have risen and stabilized, for histories to have formed and been mostly forgotten, for the ruins of the old world to have been so thoroughly covered by the new one that most inhabitants of Ooo do not think about what was there before. The Candy people do not know they live in a country built on the bones of human civilization. Most of the creatures of Ooo have no framework for understanding the Mushroom War, no way to picture a world without magic, no concept of what it means that the cars buried underground were made by beings who are now functionally mythological. This is, in its own way, one of the show's most melancholy observations about history. The world ends, and then it continues. And the continuation has no memory of the ending. The trauma is absorbed into the geology of the new world and only surfaces in the artifacts, in the ruins, in the occasional episode where someone digs in the right place and finds something that was not meant for the world they live in. Magic returned to Ooo because Ooo is what Earth became when the old suppressive structures were removed. And what it became is beautiful and terrifying and deeply, fundamentally magical in a way that the old world was not. The creatures of Ooo are magic. The landscape is magic. The kingdoms and the dimensions and the portals and the artifacts, all of it magic all the way down. This is not a world where magic is exceptional. It is a world where magic is the baseline condition of existence, and everything else is the exception. The show is, at its heart, not a love letter to this world. All the lore and all the history and all the magic we are about to explore is just the show saying, look how much is here. Look how deep it goes. Look at this world that grew up from catastrophe and became something astonishing. Isn't it worth spending some time really looking? And before we go any further, drop a comment and let us know where you are and what time it is where you are watching this. There is something genuinely lovely about knowing that people all over the world are settling in for this at different hours, in different lights, in different states of cozy. Subscribe if you have not yet, because we are barely getting started and the best parts are still ahead. Part 2. The 4 primordial elements. Fire, ice, candy, and slime as the bones of Ooo magic in Ooo does not exist as a single undifferentiated force. It has structure. It has categories. It has, at its most fundamental level, 4 primary expressions, 4 elemental forces that have been cycling through the world since the first single-celled organisms pulled themselves out of the primordial ocean. Sire? Ice, candy, slime? These are the bones of Ooo. Not metaphorically, structurally. The elementals are not just powerful characters who happen to control these forces. They are the living embodiments of forces that would exist with or without them. According to the ancient ice elemental patient Saint Pim, who survived from just before the Mushroom War, by sealing herself inside a sphere of solid ice and waiting out the apocalypse, the 4 elemental forces have been cycling through living hosts for as long as life has existed on Earth. Each time an elemental host dies, the force does not die with them. It waits, it transfers. It is reborn in another body, another form, another era. The 4 elementals have been living and dying and living again through the entire span of Earth's magical history, from the age of dinosaurs, through the reign of ancient civilizations, through the Mushroom War, and out the other side into the bright, strange morning of Ooo. This is not just an interesting piece of world-building trivia. It is the mechanical explanation for why Princess Bubblegum is a candy elemental, why Flame Princess can destabilize the planet if her emotions run too hot, why Slime Princess can absorb living things into her body during moments of elemental overflow. That these are not powers these characters chose. They are inheritances. They are the universe selecting new hosts for forces too old and too fundamental to ever fully die. Let's start with where this all began, in the deepest past the show ever shows us, the age of the dinosaurs. in an episode called Evergreen. Urgent's Evergreen was an ice elemental during the Cretaceous period, and he was a genuinely extraordinary figure, a massive ancient being with ice-blue skin who had constructed an entire castle out of compacted snow and glacier ice in a world that was otherwise tropical and swampy and very much not designed for ice architecture. He wielded his elemental power on a scale that Princess Bubblegum, thousands of years later, would never approach, in the show's own words. But the amount of ambient magic in the world at the time of the dinosaurs was vastly greater than what exists in Ooo, which is itself a reflection of the damaged, recovering world the Mushroom War left behind. The elementals of Evergreen's era were operating at full power in a way that modern elementals simply cannot match. Evergreen convened a meeting of his fellow elementals to address a catastrophic problem. A comet was incoming. A massive, world-ending comet, and Evergreen had a plan to stop it. He had built a crown, a device of extraordinary magical engineering that would grant its wearer their deepest wish. If someone pure of purpose put on the crown and wished for the comet's destruction, the crown would channel the combined power of all four elements and obliterate the threat before impact. Evergreen's three colleagues, the fire, but candy and slime elementals of that prehistoric era, refused. They could see the flaw in the plan that Evergreen could not. The crown would grant the wearer's deepest wish, not the wish they stated. And what was Evergreen's deepest wish really? Not the destruction of the comet. Something more personal. Something more selfish. Something that had nothing to do with saving the world, and everything to do with his own nature and his own obsessions. And so Evergreen was left to work with what he had, which was, unfortunately, only his apprentice, a small dinosaur named Gunther, who looked up at Evergreen with desperate, adoring eyes and wanted nothing more in the entire world than to be like his master. To be like Evergreen. To be the great and powerful ice elemental whose magic made the world cold and crisp and orderly. That you can see where this is going, and it is absolutely devastating. Evergreen had no choice. He put the crown on Gunther's head and told him to wish for the comet's destruction. And the crown, true to its function, granted Gunther's deepest wish. Not the stated wish, not the planetary salvation, but the wish Gunther had been carrying in his small dinosaur heart for his entire apprenticeship. The wish to be like Evergreen. The crown transformed Gunther into a distorted, miniature version of Evergreen, blasting ice magic in every direction and shouting in a voice that was Evergreen's voice, the commands Evergreen was always giving. "Gunther, no! Gunther, stop!" The comet hit the Earth. The KPG extinction event, the mass death of the dinosaurs, at the end of an entire era of life. All of it because the crown found the truest wish in its wearer's heart and granted that instead of the intended one. Evergreen and Gunther died. The crown survived, intact and persistent and permanently locked into its new configuration. Whatever magic it had been meant to hold, it would now always do this instead. Find the most fundamental wish in the person wearing it and try to grant it, while slowly transforming the wearer into a distorted reflection of the person the crown believed them to want to be. This is the origin of the Ice King's crown. This is the mechanism that would eventually consume Simon Petrikov, a gentle antiquarian who fell in love with a woman who wanted to go to Australia, who found a strange artifact in Scandinavia and put it on as a joke, and paid for that joke with his entire identity. But hold that thought, because first we need to sit with what the four elements actually mean in the show's symbolic language. The Adventure Time writing team built the four elements with a specific philosophical layer underneath them. Each one corresponds to a classical temperament from ancient humoral psychology. Fire corresponds to the choleric temperament, aggressive, volatile, passionate, prone to anger. Ice corresponds to the melancholic, introspective, aside, withdrawn, quiet. Slime corresponds to the phlegmatic, slow-moving, apathetic, absorptive, content. Candy corresponds to the sanguine, cheerful, sociable, enthusiastic, joyful to the point of becoming overwhelming. And then there is a fifth element, lumps. Lumpy space princess. Lumps is described in the show as the subspace molecular lattice that binds the scientific and magical forces of the universe together. It is the anti-element, the force that sits orthogonal to the other four and can undo their excesses when they spiral out of control. Lumpy Space Princess tapping into her anti-elemental power to restore Ooo from the chaos of Patient Street Pim's elemental flooding is not played as a surprise twist. It is played as a natural consequence of what Lumps is and has always been. The thing that holds everything else in check. The messy, dramatic, self-absorbed force of just being real when everything else has become too much of what it is. There is something almost funny about that, and also something quite profound. But the most powerful counterforce to elemental chaos in the entire history of Ooo is embodied by the most famously extra character in the show. LSP is the anti-element not because she is serene or balanced or cosmically wise, but because she is stubbornly, unstoppably herself in a way that cuts through every other kind of magic like a knife through foam. The elemental forces, when they run wild, produce their corresponding temperament in everything they touch. When Princess Bubblegum's candy power overflowed in the Elements miniseries, every creature it touched became disturbingly, obsessively happy. Smiling, cheerful, dull, unable to think critically or resist. When the fire element overcame the Fire Kingdom, everyone inside it became violent and aggressive, burning with an anger that felt purposeful but was actually just elemental noise. Ice made everything cold and withdrawn and sad. Slime made everything slow and absorptive and indifferent. The elements are not just physical forces, they are emotional ones. They alter the interior states of the beings they touch as much as they alter the exterior world. This is why Patient Street Pim is such a rich villain. She is the ice elemental who survived the Mushroom War by thinking ahead and acting with caution. And yet she is also, by temperament, a melancholic. When she is freed from her ice sphere and discovers that 1,000 years have passed and everyone she ever knew is dead, she handles this with a kind of brittle cheerfulness that quickly frays at the edges. She wants to unite the four elementals and restore some cosmic balance that she believes has been lost. But her plan goes catastrophically wrong precisely because she does not understand the difference between elemental magic and the living people who happen to embody it. She treats Bubblegum and Slime Princess and Flame Princess as vessels for elemental forces, and in doing so, makes the classic magical error of Adventure Time, of treating people as though their power is more important than who they are. The elements of Ooo are real and ancient and structurally foundational, but they do not belong to the people who carry them. Those people borrow them for a lifetime, and then the elements move on. The borrowers are always more interesting than the loan. There's one more thing worth noting about how the elemental system works within the larger magical architecture of Ooo, and it is something the show handles with typical oblique elegance. The amount of elemental magic available to any given incarnation of the four elementals is directly tied to the amount of ambient magic in the world at that time. Urgent's Evergreen, operating in the Cretaceous period when the Earth was saturated with magical energy, could build a castle of solid ice in a tropical climate and maintain it indefinitely. Patient St. Pim, before the Mushroom War, could barely use her powers at all. The pre-war world was one of technological modernity, low magic, at the same era in which Simon Petrikov could buy a crown from a dockworker and not immediately know what it was because the concept of genuine magical artifacts was so far outside the operational assumptions of his civilization. Princess Bubblegum, in the present of the show, has moderate elemental power. She can conjure a single jelly bean with enormous concentration. She has never, before the events of the Elements miniseries, expressed her candy elemental nature in any significant magical way. This is not because she lacks the inheritance. She carries the full weight of the candy elemental line within her. It is because the world of Ooo, for all its magic, is still in a relatively early stage of magical recovery. The ambient magic that would have made Evergreen godlike is still rebuilding. Every century, there is a little more of it. On every century, the elementals who carry these ancient forces find themselves able to do a little more. What happens in the Elements miniseries, when Patient St. Pim forces the magical potential of all four elementals to unlock simultaneously, flooding the world with undirected elemental power, is a preview of what Ooo might eventually become if the ambient magic keeps growing and the elemental hosts keep pushing their inheritances to their limits. It is a preview, and it is deeply uncomfortable because what it shows is that more power is not the same as better. More elemental power, poorly distributed, without the wisdom to contain it, without the balance of the fifth element and the anti-elemental force, produces a world that has been sorted into four temperamental extremes with no middle ground, no nuance, and no one capable of just being a person rather than a walking embodiment of a fundamental force. Lumpy Space Princess saves the world by being stubbornly ordinary in the face of the extraordinary. That is not an accident of character or a joke at the expense of the most dramatic character in the show. It is the show's exact thesis about what magic is for and what it is not for, delivered through the most deliberately over-the-top possible vehicle. Magic is not a replacement for being a person. It never has been. The most powerful force in the elemental history of Ooo is the refusal to be reduced to your power and nothing else. And there is something specifically beautiful about the fact that Lumpy Space Princess herself does not know she is the anti-elemental for most of the story. She is not performing anti-elemental behavior. She is just being herself, loudly, dramatically, completely herself, and that turns out to be exactly what the world needs. The universe picked its anti-elemental and hid it inside the show's most reliably comic figure, which is either the universe's sense of humor or the show's writer's sense of humor, and possibly both at once. Part 3. The Ice Crown, a wish that swallowed a man. Let's talk about Simon Petrikov. Before everything else, before the Ice King, before the wizard with the long white beard and the stolen princesses and the lonely castle in the frozen north, there was Simon. Simon with his olive skin and his thick-framed glasses and his good brown suit, and his genuine, slightly nerdy enthusiasm for ancient artifacts. Simon, who was an antiquarian, a person who loved old things, who found joy in the material history of lost worlds. Simon, who was engaged to a woman named Betty Groff, who was brilliant and adventurous and wanted to see the whole world and had agreed somehow to share her life with this gentle academic who got excited about dusty objects. He found the crown in Scandinavia. He bought it from a dock worker who was probably very glad to be rid of it. He did not know what it was. He thought it was interesting. He thought Betty would find it interesting. He put it on as a joke to make her laugh. She did not laugh. What happened instead in those first seconds of contact with the crown was the beginning of something that would take 1,000 years to fully resolve. The crown latched on. The crown recognized the deepest structure of who Simon Petrikov was. That the thing he loved and feared losing in equal measure, the word he used for Betty that was also now, suddenly and horribly, the word for every woman who caught his fading gaze, princess, my princess. That is what the crown found in him. That is what it began to distort. The magic of the crown works slowly. This is part of what makes it so cruel. Simon did not become the Ice King overnight. He became the Ice King over decades, through repeated use, through increasingly fragmented contact with his own identity, through the glacial erosion of memory that the crown produced every time he wore it. His skin began to turn blue, his nose elongated, his eyes lost their pupils and went white and flat. His hair bleached and grew. The man who had owned his reflection, who had known himself in the ordinary way of people who have not yet been touched by magic, gradually stopped recognizing the face in the mirror. He was there, and then he was less there, and then he was Simon-shaped space with something else inside it. He recorded videos during this period, trying to preserve some record of who he had been, knowing that the crown was eating his ability to hold on to himself. He told the camera about Betty, knowing he was forgetting her. He described his own deterioration with the careful, slightly academic language of a man who had spent his life studying the past and now found himself becoming his own artifact. These tapes, discovered by Finn and Jake in the episode Holly Jolly Secrets, are some of the most quietly devastating minutes in the show. There is something unbearable about watching a man try to archive himself before he disappears. The crown granted him immortality and ice magic in exchange for his sanity and his identity. That is the transaction, stated plainly. And the awful part is that by the time the full exchange was complete, the Ice King could not have told you what he had lost. The Ice King does not grieve Simon Petrikov. He does not remember Simon Petrikov. He watches one of Simon's videos and feels only confused embarrassment at this strange man who used to wear glasses and cry about a woman he apparently loved. The Ice King does not know that he is sad. He is just lonely, and he kidnaps princesses because somewhere in the wreckage of his heart, the crown has preserved the word princess as a placeholder for something he can no longer name. Marceline knows, and this is the part that truly hurts. In the aftermath of the Mushroom War, in the ruins of human civilization, a young Marceline was alone. She was a child, half demon, half human, 4 or 5 years old at most, walking through a world that had just ended, surrounded by evidence of everything that had been lost. Simon found her. He was already deteriorating, already losing himself in increments, but he was still Simon enough to recognize a small child who needed protection and provide it. He looked after her. He gave her a stuffed toy, a rag doll she named Hambo, to comfort her during the worst of it. He sang songs with her. He kept her warm and fed her and read to her from books he found in the rubble. He was, in every meaningful way, her family in a world that had no family left. And then he had to leave. He wrote her a letter before he went. He told her that he was afraid of what the crown was turning him into. He told her he was afraid of hurting her, of becoming something dangerous, of disappearing entirely and leaving behind only the thing the crown was making him. He left because he loved her, and because he could no longer trust himself to be safe. She kept that letter for 1,000 years. The Ice King, when we meet him at the start of Adventure Time, is kidnapping princesses and building snow golems and generally being a nuisance in the manner of someone who is very powerful and very lonely, and has no idea how to be either. He is not menacing in the way a real villain is menacing. He is menacing the way a sad person who has been alone too long is menacing, unpredictably, desperately, with a kind of manic energy that is actually just grief without a name. He seeks Marceline out sometimes. He does not remember why. Something in the deepest part of what was, Simon pulls him in her direction. She tolerates him. More than tolerates him, actually, in the quiet of moments the show handles with great delicacy. She loves him, or loves what is left of him, or loves the version of him that is now only visible in the way he sometimes looks at her with an expression that is very slightly more gentle than the Ice King usually manages. The crown built by Urgent's Evergreen to save the world from a comet consumed a kind man who bought it from a dockworker in Scandinavia, stole his mind and his history and his love, used him to protect a small girl during an apocalypse, and then spent 1,000 years turning his longing for his lost love into an obsession with the word she answered to. This is the history of the most powerful magical artifact in Ooo. This is what the crown is. Not a tool, not a weapon, a wound that became an identity. Betty Groff came back eventually. She came through a time portal that the Ice King accidentally opened, stepped out of the past and into a world 1,000 years ahead of everything she had known, and saw immediately what had happened to Simon. She spent the remaining years of the show trying to fix it, trying to find a way to give Simon his mind back without killing him, because the crown's magic was all that kept him alive. She became a wizard in the process. She literally stole magic from Magic Man by wearing his enchanted hat, acquiring his power and some portion of his madness in the exchange. She made increasingly desperate decisions in increasingly desperate circumstances. And in the end, at the series finale, she got what she wanted in the worst possible way. GOLB's strange entropic digestive process stripped the crown of its power inside the god of chaos's stomach. Simon came back, confused, mortal, old, blinking in the strange light of a world that had existed for 1,000 years without him, and reached for Betty and found her already moving away from him, back toward GOLB, back toward the sacrifice that would save the world and leave Simon to live it without her. She merged with GOLB. She became something vast and terrible and no longer entirely Betty, that she kept one piece of herself, the piece that loved Simon, and used it to make sure GOLB's chaos never touched him again. And then she left through a dimensional portal, carrying the god of chaos with her. And Simon stood in the wreckage and tried to understand what had happened to the 1,000 years between buying a strange crown in Scandinavia and standing in the ruins of a battle in a world made of candy. The magic of the crown, in the end, was not just ice powers and immortality. It was the magic of consequence, of the long, terrible chain of events that a single moment of careless curiosity can set in motion, reaching forward through 1,000 years of history and touching every person who ever mattered to the man who put it on. Part 4. Marceline and the Demon Inheritance. Magic of Blood, Darkness, and Transformation. Marceline Abadir is 1,000 years old. She has been alive through all of it. The Mushroom War, the rebuilding, the First Kingdoms, the establishment of the various powers that now divide Ooo into its patchwork geography of candy and ice and fire and swamp. She has watched civilizations rise and be absorbed into other civilizations, has watched rulers come and go, has watched the world she grew up in become something so thoroughly transformed that there is almost no visible continuity between the ruins she walked through as a child and the world she navigates as an adult. She carries all of this in her. Not metaphorically, quite literally. Marceline's magic is partly memory, partly inheritance, partly accumulation. She has been collecting power for 1,000 years, absorbing it from enemies she defeated, synthesizing it into her own strange hybrid nature. Let's talk about what Marceline actually is, because the answer is more complicated than it first appears. She is half demon on her father's side. Hunson Abadir, whom we will discuss in more detail in the next section, is described in the Adventure Time Encyclopedia as a primordial demonic entity who has existed since before time as we understand it, when only monsters roamed. His biology and his nature are so fundamentally different from ordinary life that what passed between him and Marceline's human mother is something the show wisely leaves slightly unclear. What is clear is the result. Marceline was born with demonic heritage, which gave her a certain native relationship to dark forces, to transformation, to the consumption of souls, an ability she appears to have inherited from her father, refined into something more elegant and more purposeful than Hunson's rather blunt approach of simply eating everyone's soul in the immediate vicinity. She is also, eventually, a vampire, but not in the way you might assume. She was not simply bitten by a vampire in a dark alley and converted involuntarily. Her vampirism is more complicated, more chosen, and more expensive than that. In the years following the Mushroom War, after Simon had left and she was surviving on her own, Marceline became a vampire hunter. She did this because she was trying to protect the small, scattered groups of humans who were trying to rebuild civilization in the ruins of the old world. Now, she was young, a teenager by this point, and she was already extraordinarily powerful by virtue of her demonic heritage, which gave her the ability to absorb the souls and powers of the vampires she killed. One by one she hunted them, and one by one she accumulated their individual gifts. The power of the Fool, the sight of the Empress, the physical resilience of the Hierophant, the near invincibility of the Moon. Each vampire she staked expanded her own magical portfolio, made her stranger and more powerful and harder to hurt. And then she met the Vampire King. He was the apex. He was the strongest, oldest, most dangerous of all the vampires remaining in Ooo, and their battle was genuinely epic. Two extraordinary beings at the height of their respective powers, fighting over the future of the human survivors who were trying to claw their way back from the edge of extinction. Marceline won. She drove her stake into the Vampire King's heart, and in the last second of his life, he turned his head and bit her neck. This was not an accident. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was ensuring that vampirism would survive, would persist, would have a host capable of carrying it forward, because the Vampire King, whatever else he was, understood that his species would not outlast the next generation without someone to carry the tradition. He chose Marceline specifically. He chose the person who had just killed him to carry what he was into the future. So Marceline became a vampire. Or rather, she became something that had never existed before. Because she was already something that had never existed before. Half-demon, carrying the absorbed powers of multiple eliminated vampires, now also fully vampiric. Her relationship to sunlight and blood and mortality became a strange hybrid of all three heritages at once. She can survive sunlight with effort and protection, unlike most vampires for whom direct exposure is immediately lethal. She does not drink blood. She feeds on the color red, which she can drain from objects while leaving the objects themselves physically intact. Strawberries work. So does red dye. She bites people only rarely, and usually only in emergencies or in complicated social situations involving her own complicated history with boundaries. Her magic, when she wields it actively, reflects this layered nature. She can shapeshift, not into a single form, but into a bewildering variety of creatures, each one drawing on a different aspect of her heritage. She can become an enormous bat, a writhing mass of tentacles, a wolf, a reptilian creature that carries no name in any language she knows. She can turn invisible. She can raise the dead if she chooses to. She can fly with the precision and speed of someone who has been doing it for 1,000 years and has long since stopped finding it anything other than simply efficient. She can summon necromantic energy, and she can project telekinetic force, and she can, in moments of extreme need, release the vampiric essence she has spent her life accumulating in a wave of concentrated darkness that can overwhelm even creatures significantly older and stranger than herself. There is a price for all of this power, and the show is careful and quiet about stating it. She will watch everyone she loves grow old and die while she remains. This is the other side of immortality, the part that does not appear in the promotional materials. Simon changed, became something else, was in some ways taken away from her. Her human mother died, probably in the Mushroom War or its immediate aftermath. In the silence of someone who is not discussed much because grief needs its silences. The human tribe she protected, the people with the animal hats who gave her something like belonging for a brief, specific period of her long life, they are gone now, dead of natural causes hundreds of years past. Everyone and everything she has ever built a connection with has eventually, inevitably ended. She has been carrying this for 1,000 years. And she does it in the way people carry impossible things when they have had long enough to grow accustomed to the weight, without making a show of it, without collapsing under it, but also without quite being able to put it down. She plays music about it. She makes the grief into songs and plays them on her axe bass, which was her mother's battle axe before it was an instrument, which is its own kind of statement about what she does with inherited power. The magic of Marceline is not a gift. It was never a gift. It is a collection of survivals, of each terrible thing that should have killed her, but did not, accumulated over 10 centuries into something extraordinary and exhausting, and very, very hard to look at directly. Part 5. The Nightosphere, a dimension made of evil. As in the magic that holds it together. To understand Marceline's full magical inheritance, you have to understand where half of her came from. And that means understanding the Nightosphere. The Nightosphere is an alternate dimension, a place that runs parallel to Ooo without being part of it, accessible through a ritual that is simultaneously deeply arcane and genuinely absurd. You draw a happy face on a surface. You douse it with bug milk. You speak the phrase maloso vobiscum et cum spiritum, which is a corrupted Latin phrase roughly translatable as evil be with you and with your spirit, a deliberate inversion of the Catholic liturgical exchange between priest and congregation that the show's writers clearly appreciated for its dark humor. Do these three things, and the surface becomes a portal, and through the portal is the Nightosphere, burning and chaotic and filled with a variety of demonic creatures engaged in the perpetual business of existing in a dimension defined by chaos. The Nightosphere looks like hell. The show acknowledges this directly. The visual design of the dimension is explicitly inspired by Hieronymus Bosch's famous triptych, The Garden of Earthly Delights, specifically the right panel depicting hell, with its fantastical architectural nightmares, and its strange creatures performing incomprehensible acts of torment or joy, or something that exists between the two. Bosch's hell is not orderly. It does not make systematic sense. It is a dimension in which the logic of normal experience has been replaced by something more associative, more dreamlike, more governed by the emotional and symbolic weight of things than by their physical properties. The Nightosphere operates on similar principles, but the Nightosphere is not quite the same as hell. It is a dimension of chaos and evil, certainly. Its ruler, Hunson Abadir, is described as the Lord of Evil, and he earns that title in the most straightforward possible way. He eats souls for entertainment. He rules through fear and absolute power. He exists in a state of what he describes as complete evil, which the show eventually complicates slightly by revealing that the Nightosphere amulet he wears may be responsible for at least some of his alignment, but only slightly. Hunson without the amulet is somewhat more relaxed. He is still the ruler of a demonic dimension. He is still not a good person, but he just makes sandwiches for himself instead of actively consuming the souls of everyone in his immediate vicinity. The Nightosphere amulet is the magical linchpin of the entire dimension. It is the source of Hunson's powers. Without it, he is a very old, very powerful demon, but not the all-consuming catastrophic force he represents with it. When he wears it, he can project green energy capable of either vaporizing or transforming whatever it strikes. He can create enormous demonic cloud forms. He can pull souls out of living bodies with what appears to be almost no effort. When Finn accidentally releases him from the Nightosphere during the show's second season, Hunson moves through Ooo, stealing souls at a pace that is genuinely alarming. Hundreds of people in a short time, but leaving behind empty-eyed bodies that are still alive but entirely, terribly vacant. The amulet, importantly, does not only work for Hunson. This is one of the more fascinating details the show reveals in the episode Daddy's Little Monster. Any person who wears the Nightosphere amulet undergoes a transformation. Their alignment shifts immediately and completely to chaotic evil. They gain access to the same destructive powers, and they take on a demonic form that varies depending on their inner nature. Finn, wearing it briefly, becomes a vast purple mass of tentacles and eyes. Marceline, when tricked into wearing it, becomes an enormous demonic version of herself with an inverted triangle head and the capacity for arbitrary and extreme punishment, handing out bizarre torments to the demons who present their cases to her in a manner that is disturbingly consistent with the history of actual demonic jurisprudence in various mythologies. The magic of the Nightosphere is fundamentally the magic of chaos elevated to governance. The dimension runs because Hunson runs it, and Hunson runs it by being the most powerful thing in it, and by ensuring that the chaotic energy of the dimension has somewhere to direct itself toward him through the amulet, and then outward into whatever activity keeps the demonic population occupied enough to not collapse into pure entropy. The Nightosphere does not have laws in any civilizational sense. It has Hunson, which is a different kind of ordering principle. What is genuinely interesting about the Nightosphere in the context of Adventure Time's larger magical system is the way it interacts with the Lich, and specifically the way the show insists that it does not interact with the Lich. The Nightosphere is full of chaos and evil and demonic energy, and the Lich is arguably the most evil entity in the show's universe, but they are not connected. The Nightosphere is not hell in the religious sense, and the Lich is not Satan. The show is very deliberate about keeping these categories separate. The Nightosphere is a dimension with its own history and its own rules, run by a specific entity with specific powers. The Lich is something entirely different, a cosmic force that did not emerge from any dimension but from the universe's own structure, but from the cyclical nature of change and destruction that predates any constructed dimension or any deliberate act of evil. The Nightosphere represents magic as a kind of institutional K, evil organized enough to be a kingdom, chaotic enough to never be entirely controlled, running on the power of an ancient artifact that transforms its wearer and the dimension that artifact governs. It is magic as governance, magic as infrastructure. The amulet is not just a weapon, it is a key to a dimension, and the dimension functions because the key exists and because someone is always willing to wear it. That Marceline was born from this place, or rather, born from the creature who runs it, is one of the most interesting things about her magic. She carries the potential of the Nightosphere within her without being governed by it. She can access demonic power without being consumed by it. She has the capacity for the Nightosphere's particular brand of darkness and chooses mostly not to deploy it. This is not weakness. It is the specific kind of control that comes from knowing exactly what you are capable of and deciding every day to be something different instead. Her mother was human. Her father is eternal evil. She is neither, and both, and something that has no easy name. Part 6, The Lich, when magic becomes the end of everything. If the other magical forces in Ooo exist on a spectrum from creative to destructive, the Lich exists somewhere off the end of that spectrum entirely. He is not destructive in the way that fire is destructive, which is also generative. He is not chaotic in the way that the Nightosphere is chaotic, which still produces a kind of dark life. The Lich is the magic of ending, the magic of nothing at all. He is, as he himself describes in one of the most quietly terrifying lines in the show, older than existence itself. A survivor of a time before there was nothing. Sit with that phrase for a moment. A time before there was nothing. Not a time when there was something. A time before there was even the absence of things. Before the concept of nothing existed. Before the universe had the framework to contain the concept of zero. The Lich claims to predate not just the universe, but the logical possibility of the universe. Whether this is literally true or whether it is the kind of statement a being of unfathomable age makes when trying to communicate its own scope is, perhaps, a distinction without a practical difference. Thus, the Lich is old in a way that makes every other old thing in Adventure Time look recently manufactured. His physical history in the show is somewhat more concrete, though still extraordinary. His essence arrived on Earth via a catalyst comet, one of a series of comets that have struck the planet approximately every 1,000 years throughout its history, each one carrying a specific kind of transformative potential. The Lich's catalyst comet is the green one, the one with the horn-like flames, the one that is shaped vaguely like a snarling face. It is the comet that killed the dinosaurs. It is the comet that, at the end of the Mushroom War, I dropped something into the radioactive wasteland of what had been human civilization. Something that found the mutagenic waste and the radioactive soil and the absence of meaningful life, and decided that this was a suitable environment for taking physical form. The Lich emerged from the Mushroom War not as a cause but as a consequence. He did not create the apocalypse. He used it. He found the conditions suitable for manifesting in physical form, and he did so, stepping out of the aftermath of humanity's greatest catastrophe as though the catastrophe had been built specifically to produce him. He found a body. The show implies he possessed a person submerged in mutagenic waste. And he rose from it as the skeletal, a rotting figure that viewers first encounter when the ancient tree in the Candy Kingdom breaks open and releases him in mortal folly. His magic is the magic of death and ending. He can project green flames that disintegrate living matter on contact. He can exercise telepathic control over vulnerable minds, projecting his will into the thoughts of people who are susceptible, bending them to his purposes with a confidence born of having done this to countless beings across the entirety of his existence. He can possess living and dead bodies, transforming them into vessels for his will. He can speak commands that strip the will from anyone who hears them, leaving behind creatures who exist only to serve his singular goal. And that goal is always the same: the extinction of all life, of all. This is not the goal of a villain with understandable motivation. It is not revenge or power or grief distorted into destruction. The Lich wants the extinction of all life because he believes it is the correct end state of the universe, because he is, in a fundamental sense, the personification of that end state. The living embodiment of the universe's eventual entropy in a form that has acquired self-awareness and intent. He is not cruel in the way that emotional cruelty works, through the pleasure of others' suffering. He is something colder than that. He is indifferent to suffering because suffering implies the existence of beings capable of suffering, and beings capable of suffering are simply material, to be processed on the way to the final state. When the Lich wishes at Prismo's time room for the extinction of all life, and he does it with the smooth confidence of someone filing a document. 5 words. I wish for the extinction of all life. The most monstrous statement in the show, delivered in Ron Perlman's molasses dark voice with no particular drama, as though it were merely an administrative matter being handled at the appropriate office. Jake's counter-wish changes the shape of this catastrophe without eliminating it. The Farm World timeline, the alternate reality Finn's corresponding wish creates, in which the Lich never existed, demonstrates that the Lich is not containable through simple negation. If you remove the Lich from a timeline, the universe finds another way for his function to be served. In Farm World, a version of the Lich eventually emerges anyway, possessing Farm World Jake, because the universe has a place for what the Lich represents. And that place does not stay empty simply because a single instance of the Lich is prevented from filling it. In the main timeline, the Lich is eventually transformed by the healing blood of the Citadel Guardians into something entirely unexpected: a baby. A round, pink, harmless infant who is adopted by Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig and named Sweet Pea. This is both the most Adventure Time possible resolution to a world-threatening entity and a genuinely rich piece of storytelling. Sweet Pea is not free of the Lich. He is the Lich, contained in a form that cannot currently access its own power. The darkness is still inside him, surfacing in nightmares, in moments of emotional distress, in the occasional terrifying blackout where something ancient and hollow briefly peers out through a small child's eyes. But Sweet Pea grows up. Now he laughs and plays and eats the meals his parents make for him and goes to school and makes friends and has the regular struggles of being a small person in a large world. The Lich is inside him, and the Lich sometimes speaks to him in the dark, whispering things about his true nature and his true purpose. And Sweet Pea, in the episode Whispers, faces down that whispering and rejects it, not by suppressing it, not by destroying it, but by simply continuing to be Sweet Pea, by being the ordinary life that grew up around and through the ancient evil without being consumed by it. This is the magic of Adventure Time's moral imagination, that the most powerful force for death and destruction in the multiverse can be met by a small child who decides that he would rather go home for dinner. That the answer to the Lich is not another weapon or another wish, but just the simple, persistent accumulation of ordinary days. Sweet Pea is not invincible. He is not even particularly powerful in the cosmic sense. He is just a person who is given a life and is choosing to live it, and that turns out to be, in the show's gentle and devastating logic, enough. Part 7. Princess Bubblegum and the magic of making life Bonnibel Bubblegum did not discover magic. She invented life. This is not a metaphor. It is not a spiritual claim about the nature of creativity or the power of scientific vision. It is a literal statement about what happened approximately 800 years before the events of Adventure Time, when a self-aware mass of pink biological material that had achieved independent consciousness in the ruins of the post-Mushroom War world figured out how to manufacture sentient beings from candy. Let's be precise about what Princess Bubblegum is and where she comes from, because it matters for understanding everything about her magic. She emerged from something called the Mother Gum, a vast, sprawling, hive-minded colony of pink bubblegum biological material that formed in the aftermath of the Mushroom War. The Mother Gum is not intelligent in the way bubblegum is intelligent. It is something more like a large organism, operating on collective instinct, spreading through the landscape and adapting to whatever conditions it encountered. While Bubblegum and her brother Nettie, differentiated from the Mother Gum, became independent minds within what had previously been a collective, and then separated from it entirely, taking their new individuality with them into the ruins of a world they had not yet had time to understand. Nettie, Bubblegum's brother, is a candy dragon. He is enormous, and he is very easily frightened, and he deals with this by spending most of his existence in the roots beneath what would become the Candy Kingdom, sucking nutrients from the underground soil and producing in return the candy juice that would eventually power the kingdom above him. He is Bubblegum's closest family and also one of the beings she understands least, because Nettie's inner life is almost entirely inaccessible to her. That he is content in a way that Bubblegum can recognize but not fully comprehend. She built her entire kingdom partly around the need to protect and accommodate him. Bubblegum created the candy people from a formula she developed, the candy life formula, which she would later, in a moment of spectacular carelessness, leave lying around at Castle Lemongrab, where it would be used to create an army of distorted lemon children. The candy people are living beings, capable of emotion and memory and preference and all the other hallmarks of genuine sentience. They are also, notably, capable of exploding when startled, which is a design limitation that Bubblegum has apparently decided to treat as a feature rather than a bug. The first beings Bubblegum created were family: Uncle Gumbald, Aunt Lolly, Cousin Chickle. But she made them because she was lonely, because the weight of being the only self-aware member of a very large biological entity is a specific kind of isolation that most of us will never experience. And because she wanted people around her who were like her, who could talk to her and understand her and share the project of building something meaningful in the wreckage of the old world. Gumbald immediately began planning to overthrow her. He is, in his way, the first political crisis of the Candy Kingdom. The proof that creating intelligent beings from candy does not give you control over what they do with their intelligence. He developed a formula he called Happy Juice, which would reduce a person's cognitive capacity and make them docile, and he planned to use it on Bubblegum specifically. In the confrontation, the beaker was broken and the juice splashed back on Gumbald himself, reducing him to a smiling, simple bowl of fruit punch, who forgot his own name and was perfectly, blandly content. Bubblegum looked at this outcome and made a decision. She looked at Gumbald and Lolly and Cheekly, simplified and content, and she decided that maybe people who were too simple to overthrow her were the kind of people she needed around her. She took the title Princess, which Gumbald had used sarcastically, as her own genuine title, and she began building the Candy Kingdom in earnest. This is not a flattering origin story for one of the show's most beloved characters, and the show knows it. Bubblegum is brilliant and compassionate and genuinely devoted to the well-being of the candy people. And also, she started her kingdom by chemically lobotomizing its first citizens because their political ambitions made her uncomfortable. The show holds both of these truths simultaneously without blinking, and eventually forces Bubblegum to confront them in the later seasons when she has to reckon with her own authoritarian tendencies and the ways her need for control has harmed the people she is supposed to protect. Her relationship to magic is, appropriately, deeply conflicted. Princess Bubblegum is on record calling magic scientific principles presented as mystical hoodoo. She believes, or at least has always professed to believe, that what appears to be magic is just science that hasn't been properly understood yet. All magic is science, she says. Wizards just don't know what they're doing. This is both a sincere statement of her scientific worldview and, the show increasingly reveals, a form of denial. Because Bubblegum is the candy elemental, she carries one of the 4 fundamental forces of Ooo in her own biological structure. Her candy power is real magic in the most primordial sense. It predates scientific understanding, it operates according to rules that science cannot fully contain, and when it overflows its normal bounds, it transforms everything it touches in ways that no laboratory could reproduce. When Patient St. Pim unlocked Bubblegum's full elemental potential during the Elements miniseries, Bubblegum did not become a scientist with enhanced powers. She became a candy tower being with the capacity to forcibly convert matter, a force of nature expressing itself through the form of a woman who had spent 8 centuries trying to be a rational actor in an irrational world. The magic of Princess Bubblegum is the magic of creation and control. 2 things that are always ultimately in tension. You can create life, but you cannot control what that life becomes. You can build a kingdom, but you cannot guarantee the allegiances of every being inside it. You can be the candy elemental, the living embodiment of one of the universe's 4 foundational forces, and still spend most of your existence in a lab coat, telling yourself that what you carry is just chemistry. The show's most elegant statement about Bubblegum's magic is not in any dramatic moment or epic confrontation. It is in the tiny detail that the reason the Candy Kingdom has power at all. The electricity, the heating, the juice that flows through the pipes of every building in the kingdom is because Nettie is down in the roots, feeding and producing the energy that the kingdom consumes. Bubblegum's civilization, for all its science and all its engineering, runs on something she did not design and cannot fully understand. It runs on the simple, persistent, completely unremarkable presence of her brother, who is happy to be there, who needs nothing, who just wants to be left alone with his roots. Part 8. Wizards, Madness, and the Price of Power. The wizarding community of Ooo is, in many ways, the show's most honest portrait of what it looks like when human beings acquire power they were not designed to hold. The Wizards of Ooo live primarily in a hidden location called Wizard City, accessible only to wizards who must speak a password to enter. They are competitive, elitist, and deeply preoccupied with the question of who is more magically powerful than whom. They hold competitions. They maintain secret societies within secret societies, each one convinced that its particular set of handshakes and rituals represents the truly advanced understanding of magic. They mock non-wizards relentlessly and treat ordinary competence as a kind of moral failing. This is, to be generous, not a flattering portrait of an enlightened community. But the most important piece of magic lore to come out of the show's treatment of wizards is not about any specific spell or any particular practitioner. It is a concept that Betty Groff identifies and begins researching during the later seasons, and it applies not just to wizards but to every significant magic user in the show. The concept is this: magic, madness, and sadness are always present together. Any being who holds significant magical power also holds an equivalent measure of madness and an equivalent measure of grief. These three things travel together, like a package deal that magic imposes on everyone who carries it. Look at the evidence. The Ice King is perhaps the most obvious case. His magical power came packaged with the specific madness the crown produced, and the specific sadness of a man who lost everything he loved to the thing that made him powerful. Magic, madness, sadness. All three inseparable. Magic Man is a Martian wizard who was banished to Earth for 200 years for his crimes against the community of Mars. His crimes were the direct result of his magical power going wrong in a catastrophic and deeply personal way. His lover Margles was taken by GOLB, the entity of chaos, and the loss destroyed something essential in Magic Man. Not his power, but his connection to other people, his ability to care about the consequences of what he did. He became the show's avatar of arbitrary, pointless cruelty, transforming strangers into freaks for no reason he could articulate even to himself, operating from a wound so deep he had stopped being aware that it was a wound. Magic, madness, sadness. All three. Marceline, as we discussed, carries her 1,000 years of loss in every piece of magic she wields. The vampiric powers were purchased with the inability to ever stop accumulating the people she has loved and lost. Her demonic heritage is inherited from a father who ate her fries once when she was a teenager and left her alone in the ruins of a world. A small wound that was also somehow the whole wound, the exact shape of being abandoned by someone who was supposed to see you. Magic, madness, sadness. Princess Bubblegum's madness is subtler, more controlled, more socially acceptable because it is expressed as workaholism and control rather than as visible erratic behavior. But it is there, in the surveillance cameras she installed throughout the Candy Kingdom, in the tracking chips she implanted in every citizen without their knowledge or consent, out in the way she has historically treated the people she created as problems to be managed rather than as people to be respected. The madness of power that has not been questioned long enough. The sadness of someone who built an entire civilization, partly because she was lonely and has spent the centuries since discovering that ruling is very different from connection. Magic, madness, sadness. The show asks quietly and persistently whether this trinity is inevitable or whether it can be escaped. Betty Groff believed she could research her way to an answer, that if she understood the mechanism by which magic, madness, and sadness were linked, she could find a way to sever the connection and free Simon from both his power and his deterioration. She was wrong. In a specific way, you cannot separate magic from its costs by understanding the costs better. You can only choose whether to carry the weight consciously or unconsciously, whether to let the madness run wild or to hold it as carefully as possible, whether to acknowledge the sadness or to bury it somewhere dark and let it grow in the absence of attention. The Wizards of Ooo, with their competitions and their secret societies and their absolute certainty that magic is something to be mastered, have mostly chosen unconsciousness. They live in the power and refuse to look at what the power costs them. And the result is a community of extraordinary magical ability and almost complete emotional inaccessibility. People who can reshape reality in 100 ways and cannot hold a conversation that goes below the surface without someone starting a competition about whose spells are more impressive. Magic Man himself, who eventually becomes Normal Man, after Betty accidentally takes his magic and his madness during her time in the show, is the most direct statement of this. Without his magic, he is quiet, present in a way he was not when the power was burning through him. He visits Prismo and asks him to bring back Margles, knowing it will fail, knowing that some things are beyond even the time room's capacity. He sits with what the magic cost him for the first time in centuries Now, without the ability to turn the grief into cruelty and the cruelty into someone else's problem. Part 9. Jake the Dog, Warren Ampersand, and the question of what magic even is. Jake the Dog's stretchy powers are, according to Princess Bubblegum, not magic. They are a genetic mutation. This is a distinction the show takes seriously and then complicates, and then leaves partially unresolved in one of its most interesting acts of deliberate ambiguity. Jake believes, or believed for most of his life, that his powers came from rolling around in a magic mud puddle as a puppy. This is both adorable and completely incorrect. His actual origin is significantly weirder. His father Joshua, a dog who worked as a magical investigator in the world of Ooo, was bitten on the head by an extra-dimensional shape-shifting alien named Warren Ampersand during a case that did not go quite as planned. The bite deposited Warren's DNA into Joshua's head, which then formed a boil, and the boil was Jake. Joshua and his wife Margaret raised the baby that emerged from Joshua's head as their own son, which is exactly the kind of completely matter-of-fact treatment of an extraordinary situation that Adventure Time specializes in. Warren Ampersand is from a dimension, or possibly a planet, the geography is somewhat unclear, that the show names Nera, which is Warren spelled backwards, with the straightforward confidence of a show that does not feel the need to pretend that it is not occasionally very silly. Warren is dying when he reunites with Jake in the later seasons, and his plan for dealing with his own mortality is to drain his son's life force, which he has done to every one of his many, many offspring throughout his long existence. Jake is the first child Warren ever felt guilty about draining, which he admits with the slightly sheepish air of someone confessing to something they know they should have felt guiltier about sooner. Princess Bubblegum's position, that Jake's stretchy powers are a mutation, not magic, is technically correct in terms of the mechanism. The power did not come from a spell or an artifact or an elemental inheritance. It came from genetics, from the alien DNA that found its way into an ordinary dog's family line and expressed itself in a child who could become a boat or a house or a staircase or a bubble of protection around his best friend whenever the situation required. But here's the thing. In Ooo, the line between mutation and magic, between science and enchantment, is functionally meaningless. The world is not divided neatly into natural and supernatural. Everything is natural in Ooo, because Ooo is a world in which the supernatural has been part of the baseline for 1,000 years. The radioactive mutations of the Mushroom War produced intelligent candy people. The reemergence of elemental magic produced living fires and ice wielders and slime beings. The alien DNA of a shape-shifting creature from another dimension produced a dog who can fit through a keyhole or become large enough to carry a building. All of these are technically natural phenomena. All of them are, experientially, magic. Jake's relationship to his own powers has always been somewhat casual. Yet he is a genuinely talented shapeshifter who has spent most of his life underusing his abilities because he was not particularly motivated to practice. He can do almost anything if he tries. He rarely fully tries. This is not laziness in the pejorative sense. It is a specific kind of contentment with the ordinary level of extraordinary that a given day requires. Jake does not need to be the most powerful version of himself at all times. He needs to be good enough to help Finn and comfortable enough to enjoy a sandwich afterward. There is a limit. If he stretches too far, too thin, for too long, he will die. His body becomes an insufficient container for his organs, and the biological systems that keep him alive begin to fail. This is stated plainly in the episode The Limit, and it adds a dimension to Jake's power that the show never quite forgets. He is not infinite. He just seems like it, most of the time, because he does not push to the limits. What the show does with Jake's origin is a meditation on the question at the heart of magic in Ooo. Does it matter where a power came from? Does the mechanism of acquisition change the nature of what you hold? Jake's powers came from alien genetics rather than a spell or an elemental force or a cosmic artifact. Does that make them more mundane? Or does the fact that they exist in a magical world, that they function alongside and in cooperation with spells and artifacts and elemental forces, that they have been used for 1,000 years of adventure in a land where magic is the medium of daily life, does all of that make them something more than the sum of their biological parts? Princess Bubblegum says no. The show, I think, says yes. Or rather, says that the distinction is not the point. The point is what you do with what you have. Jake uses his powers to protect the people he loves, to solve problems that seem intractable, to become whatever the moment needs him to be. He uses them also to make a truly exceptional sandwich. Neither use is more or less magical for being done by a half-alien dog rather than a wizard. Part 10. GOLB. The chaos before magic and the force magic cannot contain. At the farthest edge of Adventure Time's magical cosmology, beyond the elements and the wizards and the vampires and the demons, there is GOLB. GOLB is not a character exactly in the way that even Hunson Abadir or the Lich are characters. As beings with legible histories and recognizable motivations, and the kinds of relationships that make them comprehensible as entities with interiors. GOLB is a force, a principle. The show describes him as the embodiment of chaos, entropy, and disorder, which is to say, the embodiment of the underlying tendency of everything to become less organized, less coherent, less itself over time. He looks like a giant red baby. This is deliberate and unsettling in the way that the show's creepiest design decisions always are. By giving the cosmic embodiment of chaos and destruction a form that evokes helplessness and innocence, the show creates a specific and unforgettable kind of cognitive dissonance. What looks like a baby is a god. What looks like a beginning is an end. The 4 yellow eyes in a square head, the perpetually open mouth, the purple tongue, it is a face that should not be able to threaten anything, and yet it is the most dangerous thing in the show. GOLB's first appearances in the main series are oblique, references rather than confrontations. He appears in flashback as the entity that Simon researched during his pre-Crown academic period, described as a mysterious entity who embodies chaos, whose presence is felt in every crevice where chaos lurks. He is the force that abducted Margles, Magic Man's wife, who went into GOLB and did not come out, who was simply gone, not dead in any way that could be processed or grieved through normal channels, just absorbed into chaos, existing only as memory and feeling. The Lich refers to himself as the last scholar of GOLB, which implies a connection that the show develops in interesting directions without ever entirely resolving. What GOLB does to things that enter him is entropy. He strips them back to their essential natures. Inside GOLB, the Ice King's crown reverted to its primal wishing state, the mechanism Urgent's Evergreen built, before all of the accumulated trauma had been layered over it. Inside GOLB, the Ice King himself reverted to Simon Petrikov, the man the crown had been consuming for 1,000 years suddenly and completely returned to himself, blinking in the strange interior light of a god's digestive system, confused and mortal and himself again. Betty lost her acquired magic, reverted to the brilliant human woman who had jumped through a time portal to save someone she loved. GOLB, in this sense, is not only destruction. He is also a brutal, ruthless, thoroughly uncaring form of clarification. He strips away everything that was added and leaves only what was there to begin with. For Simon, this is salvation. The accumulated layers of the crown finally dissolved. The man returned. For the crown, it is also a kind of return to origin, the artifact becoming what it was before centuries of tragedy had been woven into it. For Betty, stripping away the magic means stripping away the years of desperate accumulation she had done in the service of saving Simon, leaving her simply herself, without the tools she had thought she needed. She puts the crown on in its reverted state and tries to wish GOLB out of existence. It does not work. GOLB is too fundamental, too universal, too much a part of the structure of things to be erased by a wishing artifact, no matter how primal. The crown searches for Betty's deepest wish and finds it, not the wish to banish GOLB, but the wish she has been carrying for the entire span of her time in Ooo. The wish to keep Simon safe. And the crown grants it. Not by banishing GOLB, not by defeating chaos, by merging Betty with it, by making her part of it, by transforming her into a new entity. GOLB Betty, who is simultaneously the god of chaos and the woman who loved Simon Petrikov, and who will now, in her new and incomprehensible form, embody both chaos and the one pocket of intention within the chaos that is directed toward protecting a single specific person. This is one of the most extraordinary pieces of magical resolution in the show. And it works precisely because it takes the logic of the magic seriously. The crown grants the deepest wish. Betty's deepest wish was always Simon's safety, not her own happiness, not even their reunion, just that he would be all right. The crown could not give her that in any form that left her recognizable as herself. It could only give her that in a form that turned her into something vast and permanent and no longer quite human. The universe accepted the trade because that is what the universe does. It accepts trades. The magic that defeats GOLB is not a spell. It is not a weapon or an artifact or an elemental force. It is, in the most adventure time possible way, a song. BMO sings Time Adventure, a quiet, a gentle song about friendship and time and the way the past and present and future are all contained in each other. And its harmony hurts GOLB. GOLB is discord. He is the chaos that makes harmony impossible. And harmony, even simple, imperfect, small harmony, a robot voice singing a soft song about friendship, is exactly the thing he cannot process, cannot absorb, cannot digest. The gathered voices of everyone in Ooo who has not yet been swallowed begin to sing together, and GOLB is not defeated by them, but he is disrupted, held back, given just enough pause for Betty to make her sacrifice. The show is telling you something important here, that magic, for all its complexity and all its history and all its ancient rules and artifacts and elemental forces, ultimately runs on something simpler. Magic runs on connection. The most powerful counter to chaos is the specific kind of order that comes from beings choosing to be with each other, choosing to make something together, choosing harmony in a universe that does not require it. GOLB will always exist. Chaos will always be there at the edge of things, waiting. But as long as there are beings in the world who choose to sing together, chaos does not win. Part 11. The Cosmic Architecture of Ooo. Dead worlds, Prismo, catalyst comets, and the living universe. We have been talking about magic as though it exists only within the Land of Ooo, as though its history is bounded by the geography of a single continent on a single planet. But everything we have discussed so far is local. It is Ooo scale. The actual magical cosmology of Adventure Time is significantly larger and significantly stranger, and it changes the meaning of everything else we have discussed. Let's start with the catalyst comets. Every 1,000 years approximately, a comet strikes the Earth. These comets are not random astronomical events. They are intentional. Agents of change, cosmic interventions in the history of the planet. Each comet embodies a specific quality, a specific kind of transformative potential, and when it strikes, it changes something fundamental about the direction of things. The green comet, the Lich's comet, the one shaped like a snarling death face, embodies extinction and ending. The blue and pink comet, which is also in a very specific and extraordinary way, Finn himself, embodies goodness, heroism, the quality of someone who will stand up to darkness. This is one of the most important and most quietly handled revelations in the entire show. Finn the human is not just a boy. He is or contains, or is this iteration of the incarnation of a catalyst comet. The purple cosmic entity who addresses him in The Comet explains this, that the comets are not just rocks. They are intelligences, purposes, concentrated intentions that take physical form and strike the Earth and change it. Finn's comet and the Lich's comet are counterexamples to each other. One brings death, the other life-defending. One brings ending, the other persistence. They have been cycling through the history of the Earth, these two opposite forces, arriving every 1,000 years, in new forms, meeting in new configurations, playing out their ancient opposition in new contexts with new characters. The Lich, as a former catalyst comet, is the universe's death force wearing a physical body. Finn, as a former catalyst comet, is the universe's life-defending force wearing a physical body. The show does not dramatize this revelation as much as it could, perhaps because the implication is almost too large. That the human boy at the center of the story is not merely a child who happened to survive an apocalypse, but a recurring cosmic intention whose current iteration just happens to be a kid with a backpack and a grass sword and a very loyal dog. The Crystal Citadel, before it is destroyed, is the prison for beings who committed cosmic crimes. being so powerful and so fundamentally dangerous that ordinary imprisonment was insufficient. Who had to be suspended in a crystalline dimension outside normal space-time to prevent them from continuing to affect the universe. The Lich was imprisoned there, briefly. The man who created Finn, his biological father, Martin Mertens, one of the more disappointing revelations in the show, was also imprisoned there for crimes the show eventually reveals were significant. The Citadel exists as evidence that the universe has a justice system of some kind, or at least a containment protocol for beings who have overstepped so dramatically that normal consequences are insufficient. And then there is Prismo. Prismo exists at the center of time, in the time room, in a space that is outside normal time, but adjacent to all of it simultaneously. He is the wish granter, the being who processes the desires of those who find their way to him and translates them into reality according to rules older than the universe itself. He is two-dimensional. He is pink and yellow. He has a magnificent pickle collection and deeply values the company of anyone who visits him without an agenda. He is, in every measurable way, the most powerful individual entity in the Adventure Time universe, and he spends most of his existence watching movies alone and hoping Jake will stop by. Prismo is also, in the most Adventure Time possible construction, the dream of an old man. Somewhere in the multiverse, an old man sleeps, and his dream is the Wishmaster at the center of time. If the old man wakes up, Prismo ceases to exist. The most powerful being in the multiverse, whose reach extends to every timeline and every reality, that is dependent for his existence on a sleeping human who is completely unaware of what he is dreaming. This is the show's cosmological equivalent of the ground being made of turtles all the way down. There is always something beneath the most powerful thing, something smaller and more vulnerable and more ordinary, upon which everything else rests. The Lich killed Prismo once. He manipulated Finn into getting him to the time room, made his extinction wish, and then killed Prismo to prevent the wish from being undone. Jake then sacrificed himself to re-enter the time room, to wake the old man and die so that the old man's dream could begin again with a new Prismo, who would then owe Jake a life, a debt Prismo honored by resurrecting Jake and, effectively, restoring the timeline. This is the most elaborate chess match in the show's history, shown the Lich using 7 moves of preparation to achieve a single catastrophic moment, Jake improvising a counter in the space of a single desperate decision. Prismo's loneliness is one of the show's most persistent emotional notes. He has infinite knowledge and infinite power and essentially no company. He cannot leave the time room. He can see every moment of every timeline at once, which means he sees every joy and every catastrophe simultaneously, which means the concept of comfort or distress becomes meaningless at the scale at which he operates. He decorates his cosmic prison like a college student's ideal hangout space: beanbags, screens, that essential pickle jar. Because what else do you do with eternity when the alternative is acknowledging how alone you are? Jake understands Prismo better than anyone else in the show. Not because Jake operates from a similar philosophy. Find what makes the present moment worth inhabiting and lean into it without apology. Jake brings Prismo sandwiches. He watches movies with him. He treats the cosmic Wishmaster like a person with preferences and a sense of humor, and a genuine need for company rather than like a powerful entity to be approached with requests. This is, in the show's moral imagination, the highest form of magical understanding, recognizing that power does not diminish the need for connection, that being extraordinary does not make being lonely any less lonely. The dead worlds, the various afterlives that exist within Adventure Time's cosmology, complete the picture of a universe that is not just spatially vast but ontologically layered, but with multiple states of being existing simultaneously and with rules governing the passage between them. Death himself rules the underworld and is depicted not as a malevolent figure but as a cold, professional one. Operating according to his own rules, neither kind nor cruel by design, simply the functionary of a universal process that does not require his approval. The afterlife is not a reward or a punishment. It is a next step with its own geography and its own politics and its own drama. Magic in Adventure Time is not separate from the world. It is not a layer added on top of ordinary physics. It is the substance of the world, the medium through which everything that matters takes place, the language in which the universe writes its most important sentences. And the history of magic in Ooo is the history of Ooo, of the world breaking and reforming, of ancient forces cycling through new hosts, of ordinary people acquiring extraordinary inheritances and trying to figure out what to do with the weight. Every magical artifact, every enchanted being, every dimensional portal, and elemental force and cosmic entity in the show is a sentence in this history. The Ice Crown is a sentence about the price of a wish that wasn't paid attention to. Marceline is a sentence about survival and the cost of carrying what you've outlasted. The Lich is a sentence about what happens when the universe's death drive achieves self-awareness. Princess Bubblegum is a sentence about the hubris and the beauty of deciding to make life, to be responsible for beings you created with your own hands and then could not quite control. GOLB is a sentence about the limits of all of it, about the chaos that exists beneath every system that cannot be defeated, only metabolized. And Finn the human, the boy who might be a comet, who grew up in a world full of magic without ever quite becoming a magic user himself? Finn is the sentence about what all of the magic is for. It is for people. Ordinary people, or people trying to be ordinary in a world that keeps making that impossible. People who love their friends and face down ancient evil with a sword and a backpack, and the unreasonable conviction that the right thing can be done. The magic of Ooo is enormous and ancient and infinitely complex, but it is not the point. The people who live inside it are the point. The magic is just the world they live in. And what an extraordinary world to live in. Every single piece of what we covered tonight, the elemental cycles that have been running since before the dinosaurs, the crown that was built to save a world and ended up consuming a man, the demon's daughter who hunted vampires to protect the last humans, the cotton candy god of chaos that can only be slowed by a song. All of it is sitting right there inside the show, layered under the bright colors and the silly jokes and the genuinely excellent sandwiches. Adventure Time built one of the most intricate magical cosmologies in the history of animated television and delivered it piece by piece over 10 seasons, in fragments and flashbacks and offhand remarks, trusting its audience to hold the pieces and assemble them into something coherent. Tonight, we assembled them. We looked at the bones of Ooo, at the deep time underneath the world, at the histories that the characters carry in their powers and their scars and their thousand-year silences. And hopefully, while we looked, you got comfortable. Hopefully the weight of all this ancient, beautiful, complicated magic settled around you like something warm. There is so much more to explore in the world of Ooo. There is always more. The world was made to reward looking closely, and we have only looked closely at a fraction of it tonight. If you made it this far, thank you. Genuinely. This is the kind of video that takes a long time to make and even longer to sit with. And the fact that you stayed means something. If you found this relaxing, if this is the kind of thing you come back to on a quiet night when you want something interesting to think about while you drift, then please do subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. Leave a like if it was worth your time. And tell me in the comments, what piece of Oo's magic do you want to go deeper on next? There is still the Enchiridion to fully untangle. There is the Citadel and its cosmic prisoners. There is Orgalorg, who is secretly something that predates Oo's own mythology. There is the question of what happened to all the dead worlds, and whether the future version of Oo that appears in brief flash-forwards is a tragedy or a transition. There is always more to find in the Land of Ooo. Sleep well. The magic will be here when you come back. Dozing off time. Subscribe for more deep lore, relaxation, and long ASMR-style explorations. Expanded lore, the mechanics of magical artifacts in Ooo. While we have explored the major characters and cosmic forces, there is an entire ecosystem of magical artifacts in Ooo that deserves careful attention, because they reveal something about how the show thinks about magic as material culture, as objects with histories, with original purposes that have drifted over time, with the capacity to corrupt or elevate whoever holds them. The Enchiridion is the first truly significant magical artifact the show introduces, and it is presented initially as something relatively modest, a book of heroic guidance described in the title sequences as the Hero's Handbook, something Finn treasures as a guide to being a better adventurer. It is old. It is revered. While it has a jewel embedded in its cover that the show treats as almost incidentally decorative for several seasons before revealing that it is one of the gems of power, a series of jewels that, combined, can unlock the Enchiridion's true function, which is not as a book of advice at all. The Enchiridion's true function is as a key. Combined with the gems of power from the crowns of the princesses of Ooo, it creates a portal to Prismo's time room, a connection between ordinary space and the center of time itself. This is not a function that was publicly known. The Enchiridion circulated through the world of Ooo for centuries as a heroic self-help manual while secretly being a dimensional doorway waiting for someone to find all the right pieces. The Lich knows this. He manipulates Finn into assembling the pieces, using the appearance of a quest for good purposes to actually unlock a path to the cosmic wish granter at the center of time. This is the show's most elegant statement about the nature of magical artifacts. They do not announce their true natures. They wear their origins lightly and their present purposes heavily, and the gap between the two can be enormous. The Enchiridion was always a key. For most of its known history, it was believed to be a book. Both things were true simultaneously. The book function was real, the advice was genuine, the heroic guidance was valid. The key function was also real, dormant, waiting. Neither canceled the other. The same logic applies to the Nightosphere amulet, which is both a governing instrument for an entire demonic dimension and a small purple gemstone that Hunson Abadir happens to wear around his neck. Both are true. Neither is more true than the other. The amulet is not masquerading as jewelry. It is jewelry that is also the key to a dimension. It is a demonic power source that looks like an accessory. The shape of the thing does not exhaust its nature. This pattern extends through the show's entire artifact culture. The crystal ball. Finn found that could see the future, the gauntlet of the hero specifically constructed to harm the Lich. The various relics associated with specific magical bloodlines or elemental lineages or dimensional rules. Each one is an object with a surface function and a deeper one, an obvious use in a hidden capacity, and a history that predates its current holder and will continue after that holder is gone. Magic in Ooo is, among other things, the magic of accumulation. Things get old. Things carry their histories in their materials. A crown built by a prehistoric ice dinosaur to save the world from a comet will carry that history forever, will execute that original function every time someone puts it on, will keep trying to grant the deepest wish of whoever wears it, because that is what it was built to do, regardless of what the wearer intended when they put it on. The magic is not malicious. It is just thorough. It keeps doing its job even when the job has become terrible. There is something almost admirable about that, if you can manage to appreciate thoroughness in the thing that consumed Simon Petrikov. The crown does exactly what it was designed to do. It was designed with insufficient foresight by a being who did not fully understand the implications of his own design, and it has been executing those insufficient instructions with perfect, merciless precision for millions of years. Expanded lore, the wizarding arts, what it means to learn magic. The formal practice of magic in Ooo has its own educational institutions, its own community standards, its own hierarchies of prestige and contempt. The wizard community is simultaneously the show's most comedic element and one of its most psychologically rich. A portrait of any community that defines itself entirely through exclusivity and the competitive display of its central skill. What Wizard City is accessed by speaking the password Wizards Rule, which tells you most of what you need to know about the collective ego of the wizard population. The city is hidden from non-wizards, not because it requires any particularly elaborate magical concealment, but because wizards simply do not want non-wizards to be able to find it. The exclusion is the point. The city exists partly as a statement about who matters and who does not, encoded in its location. Within the city, wizard society is organized around competitions and secret societies, the two mechanisms that status-conscious communities use to both measure and perform their hierarchies. Wizard Battle is a formal competition in which wizards demonstrate their magical abilities against each other, with explicit rules that include a prohibition against non-wizards participating, a rule that Finn and Jake famously violate, to the considerable offense of the resident wizards and the complete indifference of Finn, who does not particularly care about being impressive to a community that barely acknowledged his existence before he showed up. The secret societies within Wizard City are perhaps the richest detail. Multiple societies within the same society, each one claiming access to secret magical knowledge that the other societies lack, each one maintaining its distinctiveness through rituals and handshakes, and the particular pleasure of excluding people who have not been told the password. Ice King, who is definitively a low-status wizard by the community's estimation, forms his own society during a road trip with other low-status wizards, built not around exclusive power, but around shared experience, around the specific indignity of being the wizard that other wizards look down on. His society, improvised and chaotic and not particularly focused on magical advancement, is in many ways more honest than the established ones. It exists for connection rather than status. It grants belonging to people who have been told they do not belong. The mechanics of how wizardry works, how people learn it, how it transfers, how it can be taken away, are revealed gradually through the show's treatment of various wizard characters. Betty acquiring Magic Man's magic by wearing his hat is one of the cleanest demonstrations. Magic is not purely internal to the person who holds it. It exists in and around the practitioner, and under the right circumstances, it can move. It can be transferred. It can be stolen. The hat was the vessel for Magic Man's specific flavor of reality-warping trickster magic. And when Betty put it on, the magic treated her as a suitable new host and moved in, taking the associated madness with it as an inseparable co-package. This is consistent with the broader principle about magic, madness, and sadness. The three cannot be separated, but that also means the magic cannot be separated from the other two. You cannot take the power without also taking some portion of the psychological cost. The universe does not allow the benefit without the weight. While Betty acquired extraordinary magical abilities and simultaneously acquired the specific flavor of mental instability that Magic Man had been carrying for centuries since GOLB took Margles from him, a grief so old it had transformed into the compulsive need to make others miserable, to spread his own chaos outward so that he would not be alone in experiencing it. Betty could feel this happening, and she made the choice that the show treats as both heroic and tragic. She decided the power was worth the cost because the power was what she needed to save Simon. She went mad in a specific way, became Magic Ma'am, pursued increasingly extreme plans, and the show never stopped showing you both the determination and the damage simultaneously. She is trying to do the right thing, and she is not well. And both of these things are completely true at every moment. Finn's relationship to magic is, by design, almost entirely indirect. He is not a magic user in any conventional sense. He has, at various points, accidentally acquired magical powers he did not seek and generally did not keep for long. He has wielded magical weapons. The demon sword, the Finn sword, the crystal sword, the grass blade that eventually took on a life of its own. He has worn the Nightosphere amulet briefly and not been entirely consumed by it, which the show treats as evidence of either his heroic nature or his specific kind of mental constitution. He has been touched by elemental fire magic during the events of Elements, and briefly became a fire person before Lumpy Space Princess's anti-elemental fury restored him. What Finn does not do is pursue magic for its own sake, seek out powers, or build a magical practice. He has a sword. He has his body. He has a dog who is also an alien shapeshifter. These are his tools, and they serve him extremely well, and the show is quietly insistent that they are sufficient, that the most heroic thing in a world full of cosmic powers and ancient artifacts and elemental forces is a kid who shows up with a sword and the sincere desire to do the right thing. Magic in Ooo is available to those who seek it, in abundance, in 100 forms. The show is not making a simple argument against magic, not saying power is inherently corrupting or that the old ways are better than the new. It is making a more specific argument, that magic is contextual, that it serves the person who holds it best when the person who holds it knows who they are without it. That the most effective magic users in the show, Marceline, who has had 1,000 years to understand her powers, Princess Bubblegum, who builds a scientific framework around hers, are effective not because they are more powerful than anyone else, but because they have done the internal work of understanding what they are carrying. The wizards of Wizard City, mostly, have not done this work. They have accumulated power without the corresponding self-knowledge. They are impressive in the way that an overfull container is impressive, very full, possibly about to spill, without any clear sense of what all that fullness is actually for. Expanded lore, the Dead Worlds and Death's Domain Death, in Adventure Time, is a person. He is a tall, pale figure in formal attire with a skull face and the kind of confident elegance that comes from being the only entity in your domain who is fully certain of their authority. He is, as one of the Tumblr analyses of the show accurately noted, much more Hades than Satan. A ruler of the dead rather than a tempter of the living, a being whose domain has rules, and whose enforcement of those rules is dispassionate rather than cruel. He rules the dead worlds, plural, which is itself an interesting fact. There is not a single afterlife in Adventure Time, but multiple ones, a whole cosmological ecosystem of post-death destinations that presumably reflects the diversity of beings who die in Ooo. The show does not fully map these worlds, but their existence implies a whole magical system governing the passage between the living realm and whatever lies beyond it, with Death as the administrator of that passage. Death's magic is logically the magic of finality, of endings, of the moment when the living world releases a person and they pass into his jurisdiction. He does not actively harvest souls in the manner of the Reaper mythology. He waits. The souls come to him when the natural process is complete, and he manages what happens to them according to rules that are as old as death itself. The show touches on this mythology in episodes like Death in Bloom and Sons of Mars, and what it reveals is a cosmology in which death is not an end, but a transition, a passage from one kind of existence to another, governed by an entity who is fully invested in maintaining the integrity of that passage. Death does not want the living to reclaim the dead. He does not want the dead to linger in the living world. The borders between his domain and the world of the living are important to him, and he enforces them with the particular commitment of someone whose identity is entirely defined by the threshold they guard. Magic that touches death is some of the most regulated and the most feared in Ooo. Necromancy. Marceline practices it, and the show treats this as one of the more genuinely unsettling aspects of her power set, raising the dead as obedient servants being a different category of action than most of the other things she does. The Lich's necromantic abilities are even more extreme, building armies of corpses, animating the dead in service of destruction rather than any form of continuation. There is a sense, in both cases, that necromancy represents a violation of something fundamental, of the natural boundary between the living world and death's jurisdiction, of the right of the dead to be done with the business of existing. Jake eventually dies, in the distant future of the show's timeline. The Distant Land Special, Together Again, deals with this directly, with Jake's death and what follows, with the nature of the afterlife he finds himself in, with his reunion with Finn in a world that has completely changed. The afterlife Jake encounters is real and complex, and not simply a waiting room for something else. It has its own political crises. It has New Death, a figure who has taken over Death's domain and is running it badly, that with the specific incompetence of someone who inherited authority they did not earn and does not understand. Jake has to help fix this, because in Adventure Time, the afterlife is just another place where things go wrong, and someone needs to help put them right. What this reveals about magical death in Ooo is that it is not sacred in the way that death is sometimes treated as sacred, as an unbroachable mystery, a thing beyond which no living person can meaningfully interfere. Death in Ooo is a domain like any other domain, with a ruler who can be bad at the job, with systems that can be corrupted or improved, with beings who need help and situations that require heroism. Finn and Jake save the day as sight in the afterlife the same way they save the day everywhere else, by showing up, caring about what is happening, and in figuring out what needs to be done. The magic of death in Ooo is ultimately continuous with the magic of everything else in Ooo. There is no hard boundary between the sacred and the ordinary. The extraordinary and the mundane exist on the same spectrum. Death is a person you can talk to, and afterlife is a place you can visit. and the rules that govern them can be challenged if you have a good enough reason and enough determination. This is, again, the show's fundamental stance on magic stated one more way. Magic is not above people. It is not a force that people have to defer to. It is a force that people can engage with, can push back against, can negotiate with, can sometimes even defeat. The universe has rules. The rules can be bent. The rules are made of the same stuff as everything else. And the same creativity and courage that works in the ordinary world works on the extraordinary one. Expanded lore, the multiverse, and the meaning of alternate timelines. Magic in Adventure Time is not confined to a single version of events. The existence of Prismo and the Time Room implies a cosmology in which every wish granted with sufficient power creates or reveals an alternate timeline, a parallel version of events in which the wish was the baseline, in which the change was part of the original structure rather than an amendment to it. The Farm World timeline is the most extensively explored of these alternates. When Finn wishes at the Time Room for the Lich to never have existed, the result is a world in which the mushroom bomb was stopped before detonation. Stopped by Simon Petrikov, who used the Crown's power to freeze the bomb in midair and died in the attempt. Farm World is a world in which Simon Petrikov is a hero rather than a tragedy. A world in which the apocalypse was avoided, but magic was also correspondingly reduced. A world that looks more like a slightly weird version of early modern history than like the fantastical world of Ooo. It is in many ways a less interesting world. A world without the rich, magical culture that grew up from the rubble of human civilization. A world without Oo's weird kingdoms and complicated politics and extraordinary creatures. A world in which the Lich's non-existence created a kind of stability that is also a kind of flatness. The existence of alternate timelines does not destabilize the show's emotional stakes, it deepens them. And every choice in the main timeline is a divergence from infinite possible alternatives. Every moment is simultaneously unique and part of an infinite series of moments that might have been. Prismo can see all of these timelines at once, which is why his pickle jar is philosophically significant. It is a small, ordinary pleasure chosen and maintained in full awareness that there are infinite other possible jar arrangements in infinite possible versions of the Time Room. You still choose a jar. You still choose pickles. The infinite options do not make the choosing meaningless. They make it more meaningful, not less, because you are choosing in full awareness of what you are not choosing. The magic of the Time Room, Prismo's power over wishes and timelines, is described as operating through rules older than the universe. Now, these rules are not arbitrary. They exist because without them, the ability to grant wishes would immediately collapse into chaos. Every wish undoing every other wish, every timeline contradicting every other timeline, until nothing coherent remained. The rules are the structure that makes the magic stable, that allows it to be a feature of the universe rather than a constant catastrophe. The price of those rules is that they cannot be selectively applied. Prismo grants wishes to everyone who reaches him, even as we established, to the Lich. He cannot refuse. He cannot evaluate the ethics of the wish or the character of the wisher. He processes desire into reality, one wish per customer, as specified. His sadness about this, about having to grant the Lich's extinction wish, about knowing what will happen and being bound to let it happen, is one of the most quietly devastating things the show does with his character. He has the power to grant any wish. He does not have the power to refuse to grant any wish. These are different things, and the gap between them is a kind of prison. This is the final piece of Adventure Time's magical philosophy, stated through the Wishmaster. Power and freedom are not the same thing. Having the ability to do something does not mean having the choice of whether to do it. The most powerful entity in the multiverse is bound by rules he did not make and cannot change. The ordinary people who come to him with ordinary wishes, for sandwiches, for loved ones returned, for world peace clumsily formulated, have more freedom in their wishes than he has in his responses. They are free to wish anything. He is obligated to grant it if he can, according to rules that predate everything. The magic of Adventure Time, in its entirety, is a meditation on the relationship between power and limitation, between extraordinary ability and ordinary humanity. between what magic can do and what only people can do. The magic can reshape reality, it can grant wishes, it can embody cosmic forces, it can end the world or preserve it or transform it beyond recognition. But only people can choose to be kind. Only people can choose to show up when it matters. Only people can choose to keep the pickles fresh and hope that someone will visit, to give a small child a toy and a reason to feel safe in the ruins of everything, and to write a letter that says, I loved you, and I'm afraid of what I'm becoming, and I do not want to hurt you, and I'm sorry. That is not magic. That is just people. And the show argues, gently and persistently, that it is the most powerful thing in the world. A closing note on Magic Story and Why This All Matters adventure. Time ran for 10 seasons, from 2010 to 2018 on Cartoon Network. Its mythology grew organically and sometimes chaotically, with different writers and storyboard artists contributing pieces that did not always fit together cleanly, and that the showrunners had to retrofit into a coherent whole as the mythology deepened. The result is not a perfect structure. There are loose threads, unexplained details, characters whose backstories were gestured at and never fully explored, plot lines that ended ambiguously or not at all. And yet, through all of that, the magical cosmology of Ooo is genuinely coherent in the ways that matter. The elemental cycles, the crown's mechanism, the Lich's origin as a catalyst comet, the relationship between magic, madness, and sadness, the nature of GOLB as the cosmic principle that underlies and occasionally overwhelms all constructed magical systems. These elements connect to each other in ways that reward attention, that create meaning when you hold them together, that make individual episodes richer when you understand what they are speaking to. This is what the best world building does. It creates a history so thoroughly imagined that it produces meaning you did not have to consciously plan. The writers of Adventure Time did not sit down and decide in the first season that every major magic user in the show would illustrate the magic, madness, sadness trinity. That understanding emerged from the writing, from the patterns that good writers develop when they are being honest about how power and loss and grief actually interact. The lore grew toward the truth of the emotional ideas, and the emotional ideas were made richer by the lore that grew around them. The Ice Crown is a perfect magical object, not just because its mechanics are elegant and its history is tragic, but because it is an honest representation of what it looks like when something very powerful and very old reaches into a person and rearranges them around the thing it needs them to be. The crown needed a host who had something to protect, something to long for. It found Simon, who had Betty, and it took that longing and it made it monstrous and persistent and immortal, because that was what the crown's original function required. It is not cruel. It is just thorough. And the specific thoroughness of it, the way it preserved enough of Simon to keep pulling him toward Marceline, the way it kept the word princess alive in his vocabulary as a placeholder for everything else it had taken, is heartbreaking in a way that pure cruelty would not have been. Magic in Ooo is thorough. That is the real lesson of all of it, taken together. It does not do half measures. It does not grant partial wishes or apply partial consequences or make partial transformations. When the candy element overflows, all of Ooo becomes candy. When the crown takes hold, it takes everything. When GOLB digests something, yet he returns it to its absolute essential nature. When Betty wishes to keep Simon safe, the universe takes that wish literally and permanently, with no remaining ambiguity about its scope. This thoroughness is beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, which is exactly the right proportion for a world that was born in catastrophe and grew up into something wonderful. Ooo is a world of full commitments, of people who loved all the way, suffered all the way, built things all the way, and left those things standing in the landscape for everyone who came after to find and wonder at. The ruins are still there. The magic is still running through everything. The crown survived Evergreen and Simon and will survive Gunter. The Lich survived his physical destruction enough times to fill an entire mythology. The elements keep cycling through new hosts every generation. GOLB orbits somewhere beyond the known universe with Betty inside him, chaotic and loving at once. Magic in Ooo does not end. It changes forms, it moves on, it finds new places to live and new shapes to take, and new people to mark with its extraordinary weight. The Land of Ooo is out there somewhere, full of candy and fire and impossible creatures, full of history deeper than anyone can fully excavate, full of magic so old and so thorough that it has become indistinguishable from the landscape itself. And somewhere in the frozen north, there is a penguin wearing a crown that was built to save the world, and is still, with patient, ancient thoroughness, doing its job. Thank you for watching. If you are still here, you have spent real time with this, and that means something. Drop a comment with where you are watching from. It is always wonderful to know that this kind of video finds people in so many different corners of the world, at so many different hours, settling in for something long and quiet, and hopefully worth staying with. Subscribe if you have not yet. There is more to explore in the world of Adventure Time and beyond. More lore, more mythology, more of the kind of deep, relaxing, slightly obsessive exploration of things we love that this channel exists to provide. Like the video if it was worth your time, and sleep well, wherever you are. The magic of Ooo will be here when you wake up.